Hi everyone, my name is Liz Kim and I'm a lecturer in art history at Texas A&M University, Kingsville. I'd like to first of all thank the board of TASA for this opportunity to speak as representing excellence in the field. My colleagues at TAMUK whose generous support and feedback helps to propel my research, and I'd like to thank everyone who is attending this lecture as well. And at this point, let me bring up my lecture presentation. And this presentation on women artists and teaching, an intersectional view, summarizes a two-year project undertaken by Amy von Lentel and I to find out the answer to the question, what impact did teaching have on the careers of women artists? Amy is based out of West Texas A&M University, and I am based out of Kingsville. Based on our collaborative work, the answer varies depending on who you ask and where you live, as gender and geography intersect in interesting ways to determine the trajectory of a woman artist's career. Women are often forced to take the professional positions they can get when and where they could get them. Faced with the similar professional realities, we found ourselves, Amy and I, living in small Texas towns, teaching numerous courses while carrying heavy service loads and receiving limited institutional support for research. In this environment, we each turned to projects in our own backyards, researching women artists who had taught at our institutions. And in my particular case, this was the art of Karine Spellman, whose well-known work, Road Signs, could be seen here. But because Texas is such a big spread out state, we knew nothing of each other until 2020, when another woman educator who had similarly followed a job to a small town in a remote location brought us together. Once connected, we compared the overlaps in our projects and methods. We discussed the ways that we had mined local collections and archives and come to the realization that this work not only shed light on the lives of women artists, but also yielded new insights, raised important questions about the significant role of teaching in the careers of women artists. To delve further into these issues, we organized a panel on women artists as educators for the 2020 annual meeting of the College Art Association, or CAA. This gathering yielded a number of investigative paths, including looking for the often overlooked labor performed by women artist educators, following the students and communities they reached through their teaching, and recording the effects of pedagogy on their artistic practices. These threads are further developed in contributions to a special section of In the Round as a part of the forthcoming November issue of Panorama, the journal for the Association of Historians of American Art, a CAA-affiliated society. So this issue, which is a forthcoming publication, include essays by these contributors, Rebecca Giordano, Sally Brown, and Joanna Gardner-Huguet, who wrote the essays for this suite of the collection of texts. This suite of texts also include interviews with Johnny M.A. Marbury, Santa Barraza, Kelly Church, and Renee Dillard. And these interviews were conducted respectively by Lynette Gilbert, Mary Thomas, and Melinda Seaton. Melinda Seaton, she is also part of the Texas A&M University system in the Commerce campus. In this journal issue with the article, The Art of Living, Selma Burke's Progressive Art, Art historian Rebecca Giordano surveys Burke's teaching career, beginning with her tenure at Harlem Community Art Center in the late 1930s and continuing through her retirement from the Selma Burke Art Center in Pittsburgh in 1976. Mining contemporary newspapers and the archives at Fisk University, Spelman College, and the University of Pittsburgh, Giordano looked for clues to illuminate the careers of a career of an often overlooked artist educator. Her essay meticulously outlines how Burke negotiated the cultural shift from the Dewey-inspired teaching that characterized Black artist educators in the foundational WPA era to the Black nationalist outlook of those who were part of the Black arts movement in the 1960s and the 70s. In institutional time from Fresno to today, Judy Chicago's career through art education, artist and educator Sally Brown offers a new reading of Judy Chicago, arguing that the artist's academic experiences played a crucial role in her career as an artist. Going beyond the well-documented example of the dinner party from 1975 to 79 and teasing out how Chicago's intentions as an artist were inspired by her interest in education, Brown asks readers to look again at Chicago's canonical works and see the ways in which their display invited viewers to enjoy interactive and didactic experiences. Shifting focus from the individual to the community, art historian Joanna Gardner-Huguet in her essay, Sapphire and Crystals, Education, Community Building, and Cultural Transformation, explores the history of Sapphire and Crystals, a Black women's collective based out of Chicago. She asserts that the community building, mentoring, and art-making practices of this collective are an example of what Adrienne Mare Brown calls flocking. As Gardner-Huguet demonstrates, flocking, an approach to organizing that opens up new possibilities for social change through collaborative activism, provides an important avenue of artistic investigation and agency for women artist educators. Following these insightful essays are three interviews with women artist educators working today. The artist educator, Lynette Gilbert, interviews her mother, Johnny Mae Marbury, who was the first African-American woman to join the art faculty at Tougaloo College. Gilbert and Marbury discusses the successes and the challenges associated with teaching at a historically Black college in Mississippi, including techniques for conveying to students in art studio classes the importance of African-American artists, strategies for working with the community, including the Tougaloo Art Colony, and the importance of maintaining the Tougaloo Art Collection. And I want to very quickly just show you an image relating to Johnny Mae Marbury's work here. This is one of her works, Memory Reflection from 2009. Marbury also explains the impact of Tougaloo College's art program on the lives and the careers of its former students and outlines the value of working in conjunction with other historically Black colleges through organizations such as the National Alliance of Artists from Historic Black Colleges, or NAA-HBCU. Marbury insists that readers recognize the importance of visual arts to the college's history and to the disciplines of art history, and art education. The visual cultures scholar, Mary Thomas, offers an insightful interview with contemporary Chicana Tejana artist Santa Baraza, in which the two discuss the relationship between Baraza's studio practice and teaching in higher education and beyond. And I'll also show you another image relating to this. Working in the US-Mexico borderlands, an in-between space that Gloria Anzaldúa has described as Napantla, Baraza played an important role in the Chicano movement in South Texas during the 1960s and the 70s. Baraza describes how developing her art in this context impacted her practice and allowed her to build something that extends beyond the physical and conceptual spaces of the classroom and the university, and one that transcends national borders. Her study abroad program in Oaxaca, Mexico is just one example of how women artists blend travel, art making, and experiential pedagogies. The art historian Melinda Seaton interviews Kelly Church. Let's go back to our slide here. Kelly Church, who is Ottawa and Potawatomi, and Renee Dullard, who is Anishinaabe. And they discuss the artists' respective training in the techniques of black ash basket making and how they teach these traditions in multiple contexts to both Native and non-Native people. Gender is a key aspect to how labor is divided and how art is taught in Native communities, with key differences existing between tribes, bands, families, and individuals. Cultural appropriation is a concern that they must consider when teaching non-Native students, particularly as black ash is a sacred tree tied to creation stories of Northeastern Native groups such as the Wabanaki. Unfortunately, an invasive species of beetle has been decimating black ash forests. In response to this environmental crisis, the artists and their communities have been forced to race to save seeds and harvest dying trees, a communal action based on knowledge sharing. As evidenced by the range of issues covered in these essays and interviews, the teaching experiences women artists vary. Women artists have worked with young children, art students, community members, and adult continuing education learners, as well as with students across genders. And I'll just show you an image, an example of working across genders. They have taught in urban settings and rural locations, both within and beyond the borders of the United States. They have worked in established institutions as well as in ad hoc community spaces. They have taught classes, curated public exhibitions, given guest lectures, and participated in conferences. They have directed a variety of courses from drawing, painting, printmaking, sculpture, and craft processes to art history, fashion design, penmanship, and technical drawing. They have mentored students and other professional artists, and they have created supportive social circles. And many have embraced their roles as educators, developing a compelling presence as teachers while creating their artwork. Teaching as a career building strategy for women artists especially appears to be a uniquely gendered phenomenon in American art history that thus far has been obscured and ignored. We posit that the reason teaching has been especially significant historically for women artists is that in the modern era, teaching has been viewed as a service-oriented profession that, like nursing, social work, and secretarial work, was considered acceptable for women. For women artists, art education provided an important pathway to a career as professional artists, as the academy, gallery, collector, museum track to success in the art world remained largely foreclosed to women until the feminist movement of the 1960s and the 70s. Teaching then was an arena within which a woman could take on leadership roles. As noted in these collected essays and interviews, some women artist educators received important chairships and professorships, as was the case for Baraza and Marbury, who held chairships at Texas A&M Kingsville and Tougaloo College, respectively. Such permanency and positioning were difficult to achieve for most women artists, however, given the longstanding gender biases in academia. We take seriously the import and impact of itinerant teaching for women artists, which includes short-term professorships at colleges and universities, filling in for other teachers during leaves of absence, and leading workshops and guest lecturing, which takes women artists to a variety of locations. Affording attention to the very real networking that accompanies teaching is something our work does, not only when studying artists of the past, but also when looking at living contemporary artists such as Chicago Baraza and the members of the collective Sapphire and Crystals, as well as Marbury, Church, and Dillard. In particular, the interviews and the publication highlight the importance of networking, public lecturing, curating, mentoring, and hosting community workshops have all greatly expanded the spheres of influence for these artists, and permanent positions and short-term gigs have worked together to support women artists, educators in ways that deserve recognition. Through teaching, women built community. This has been especially true for women artists of color and those at cultural and social margins who did not have access to or support from traditional institutions such as museums. Museum gallerists and curators are the gatekeepers of the art world, which tie art historical significance to the art market. Markets, as systems of capitalism, are often sexist, racist, and classist, which leave women artists on the sidelines. One way to reassert the significance of women artists is to recognize their teaching as a unique form of labor and institutional building that worked outside of and in subversion to the museum gallery system. In other words, teaching should be viewed as a form of history making by women artists themselves. To do this, it is important to connect two fields that rarely overlapped. Art history and the history of art education. The richness of artists' archives offers an excellent resource for both fields. The archives of American art, for instance, let me scroll to this. Which includes the papers of thousands of artists, could be mined for evidence of lived teaching experiences. Likewise, artists' letters are preserved more often than those of educators in other fields, especially when artists gain some fame, and such letters could be rife with direct observations about teaching practices. At the same time, the students of established artist teachers have often given statements about their teachers, offering direct evidence of audience reception for pedagogy, an aspect otherwise hard to track. In the round, this publication, this journal publication that's forthcoming pulls heavily from both art history and education, art education, and draws on important works in both fields that focus on Black and Native women artists, including the work of Melanie Ann Herzog on Elizabeth Catlett, Sheriff Bay on Augusta Savage, Rebecca Van Diver on Louise Milo Jones, Seth Feynman on Elma Thomas, Melissa Messina on Mildred Thompson, and Laura M. Evans, who is Cherokee, on Linda Loma Haftewa, who is Hopi and Choctaw. Focusing on the ways in which women's teaching practices contributed to their career development, influence, and legacy. The essays and interviews collected in the publication reveal a gap in art history, one that is both gendered and race. Some of the most renowned artist teachers in the US have been women of color, and women art educators often interacted with diverse populations through their travels related to teaching. Marbury, again, going back to here, taught students at Tougaloo, where she expanded the art curriculum and incorporated the college's African-American art collection into her teaching. Church points up the differences between teaching in her native way and teaching academically, and outlines how at times she brought her traditional social-oriented methods of education into college classrooms. Similarly, Dillard shares how she has withheld some teaching knowledge from non-native communities by sealing records of her work until after her death to avoid their cultural appropriation, not to be selfish, but to be protected. To be sure, sharing the stories of women artists as teachers help highlight their lived experiences of intersectionality, an area of research that demands attention. Intersectionality, an analytical framework conceptualized and coined by Kimberly Williams Crenshaw in 1989, is key to understanding how aspects of a person's social and political identities combine to create different modes of discrimination and privilege. How gender, race, teaching, art making, class, and location intersect in the careers of women artists. The intersectional methods of inquiry employed by the contributors to this project was mirrored in our experiences as guest editors. Due to the significant challenges posed by the coronavirus pandemic, this publication went through several iterations. When potential collaborators were not able to access archives or conduct research, we shifted gears, turning to interviews, which gave priority to the voice of artists. This move was inspired by a pillar of intersectionality, this bridge called My Back, a collection of writings by radical women of color edited by Cherry Moraga and Gloria Anzaldúa. Contributor Baraza recommended Anzaldúa's work to us, and it became a key point of reference as we conceptualized the section. For myself, especially, the focus on intersectionality was a continuation of a theme that arose from a panel that I co-chaired with contributor Sally Brown, a CAA in 2020, sponsored by the Committee on Women in the Arts, the Women Voter Suppression Roundtable. This panel looked at the politics of intersectional work in relation to the then upcoming presidential election, and included panelists Karen Mary Davalos, Joanne Morgan, and Marshall Reese on the artists of the artist collective Ligorano Reese. Davalos's book on the late Yolanda Lopez, who just passed away last month, which argues for the recognition of Lopez's groundbreaking feminist work as shaped by the intersectionality of the Third World Liberation Front, also became a key point of reference and inspiration. Beyond these connections and experiences, the project's emphasis on intersectional work is a part of a wider effort in the field, evidence in the work of scholars such as Louise Siddons and Sherry Smith. Intersectionality as an art historical method was also described recently by Siddons and Jeffrey Richmond Mole in the fall 2020 issue of Panorama as well. With few exceptions, the Academy dealer collector museum model of artistic legitimization, which has been the professional pathway for male artists, was not readily accessible to women until the latter part of the 20th century, when this model slowly began opening up to women with the rise of second wave feminism. As an alternative, US women artists often turn to teaching as a way to demonstrate their seriousness and independence as professionals, and as a way to build strong networks of influence. Through this journal publication, we hope to show that a good number of women artists found powerful voices, artistic recognition, and healthy markets for their art, not despite, but because of their teaching. For many, their work as educators became a key part of their artistic personas, an aspect that has been well recognized in the scholarship on some women, but entirely overlooked in the work of others. We wish to highlight the work that has been done to date, but also invite scholars to continue exploring teaching as, looking at teaching as a central facet in the lives of women artists in the US. Our focus on teaching recognizes root problems in art history making apparatuses, which are patriarchy, financial value, and power, which have long shaped the art market and the museum collections. And to this day, the work of women artists is significantly undervalued compared to that of their male colleagues. The highest selling painting by a woman artist, Georgia O'Keeffe's Jimson Wheat, went for $44.4 million in 2014, a mere fraction of the 100+ million that the works of male modernists have demanded for decades. Perhaps it's time to take a different approach to recognizing artistic legitimacy, one that redefines success as based on public impact and outreach instead of market value. And hopefully this is something that those of you who are in the audience could also relate to as artists, educators as well. And thank you again for being here for my lecture. And this ends my presentation here. Thank you.